Resurrection Mary has been seen along Archer Avenue for decades, but the first reported encounter with the famous ghost occurred in 1939 at a dance hall in Brighton Park, a neighborhood in Chicago. A 25-year-old man named Jerry Palis was at the Liberty Grove Ballroom and Hall when he noticed an attractive young woman in a white dress standing alone, and he asked her to dance. In a 1986 interview featured on an episode of the show Unsolved Mysteries, Palis described the woman as having blue eyes, shoulder-length curly blonde hair, and she stood about 5'7". He also recalled the woman's hands feeling cold to the touch, and she didn't seem to know anyone at the dance hall. Palis claimed he danced with the mysterious woman for hours, and although she didn't speak much, she said her name was Mary and even provided her home address on South Damon Avenue in Chicago. After a long night of dancing, the two exited the dance hall and Mary asked Palis to give her a ride home. Assuming she wanted to be dropped off at her home on Damon Avenue, Palis agreed, but when they jumped into his car, Mary asked to be driven to Archer Avenue in the opposite direction. Jerry was confused by the strange request, but thinking the woman wanted to go for a late-night drive before heading home, he didn't argue, and the two made the drive out to Archer Avenue. The drive down Archer Avenue was awkward, with very little conversation, but as they approached Resurrection Cemetery, Mary suddenly told Palis to pull to the side of the road. Feeling confused and perplexed, he parked in front of the cemetery's gates, and the woman exited the vehicle. Jerry asked the mysterious woman where she was going, and then she proceeded to walk towards the front gates of the cemetery where she vanished into the darkness. Palis was frightened by what he had just witnessed and quickly drove away from the cemetery's gates in disbelief. The next morning, Palis was so disturbed by the bizarre experience that he decided to look for answers and drove to the address on Damon Avenue that he remembered the woman disclosing at the dance hall. Jerry knocked on the front door and an older woman answered. He asked if a girl named Mary lived in the home, but the woman quickly replied no and was about to close the door when Jerry happened to notice the picture of a girl he recognized on the wall. Palis pointed at the picture of Mary and explained he danced with that girl last night before dropping her off at the gates of the cemetery where she disappeared. The woman was in shock hearing the man's incredible story, and in a sad voice explained the girl was her daughter and she passed away in a terrible accident 5 years prior. Jerry was both surprised and unsettled by the revelation, and he couldn't believe how the lifelike woman he danced with all night could possibly be someone from beyond the grave. It's unknown if Jerry Palis was telling the truth about the eerie event or if the scary story was simply made up, but in 1992, he passed away at the age of 78 and was buried in Resurrection Cemetery, the very same place he dropped off Mary in 1939. The alleged dance hall encounter in 1939 became one of many paranormal stories surrounding the famous ghost, and in the years that followed, the female phantom soon became known as Resurrection Mary. Early on, most of the scary ghost stories and sightings of Mary revolved around local bars and dance halls, but it wasn't long before drivers started having encounters with the ghost on Archer Avenue near the cemetery. In 1973, a cab driver allegedly had a run-in with the ghost one night when dropping her off at Chet's Melody Lounge, a bar directly across the street from Resurrection Cemetery. According to the bar's manager, a taxi was parked out front for an extended period of time before the frustrated driver stormed inside looking for the blonde woman he saw enter. After explaining that she owed him a cab fare, the driver, along with the bar's manager, searched the entire building and even the women's bathroom, but no one was ever found. 6 years later, in 1979, an article published in the Suburban Trib told a story about a 52-year-old taxicab driver who allegedly encountered the ghost during a terrible blizzard that year. The cab driver, who went by Ralph in the article, claimed he picked up the young woman at a shopping center along Archer Avenue. The driver said the woman appeared to be under the age of 21 and wore only a white dress, even though it was January and the temperature was freezing outside. After driving on Archer Avenue for a couple miles, the woman asked to be let out at a dilapidated building directly across the street from Resurrection Cemetery. The driver was confused because the building appeared to be abandoned and falling apart, but before he could even say a word, he looked in the mirror and the woman had vanished from the back seat without the door ever opening. Another driver who witnessed the ghost walking along Archer Avenue was Mark Rudnicki. Late one night in 1980, Mark and his wife Claire, along with two of their friends, were driving past Resurrection Cemetery when they noticed something very unusual on the roadside. On the right-hand side of the road, Mark's wife Claire noticed a woman wearing a white dress walking slowly along the shoulder. As the vehicle approached the mysterious woman and passed her, everyone in the car noticed that the woman appeared to be emitting a soft glowing light. The driver also recalled seeing what he described as a black void in place of the woman's face, even though the rest of her body was visible from the glowing light around it. Claire was frightened by the bizarre sighting and wanted to continue driving off, but Mark was so stunned by what he saw, he decided to turn the vehicle around to get a closer look. He drove back to the same spot where they saw the woman just minutes prior, but she was no longer there and had completely vanished from the road. 9 years later, in October of 1989, Janet Kalal and Pam Wilson were driving past Resurrection Cemetery late at night when the two witnessed a woman with long hair and a white dress walking along Archer Avenue. Unlike the Rudnicki encounter in 1980, the woman suddenly ran out in front of their moving vehicle and she frantically slammed on the brakes at the last second. She was convinced she hit the woman and stepped outside in a panic to offer help, but the woman wasn't there and the car showed no signs of damage. Another well-known incident that was often said to be associated with Resurrection Mary were the bent bars on the cemetery's gate. Beginning in 1976, the pictures of the bent bars were shown in many paranormal books and tours after claims of the bars being bent by the ghost of Mary forcing her way out of the cemetery. The claims were fueled by the alleged sighting of a young woman who was believed to be trapped inside the cemetery at night shortly before the bent bars were discovered. Cemetery officials later came forward and told the press the damaged bars were actually caused by a groundskeeper who accidentally backed his truck into the gate. It was also revealed that the fingerprints burned into the metal were from work gloves of a repairman who tried welding the bars with a blowtorch. If any of the paranormal stories about Resurrection Mary are true, then the real question is, who is she and why does she haunt Archer Avenue near the cemetery? There are a few deceased Marys rumored to be the ghost, but many historians believe the mysterious woman behind the scary ghost stories is either Mary Bregovy or Anna Norkus. Although the two women were years apart in age, their death dates and stories are both very interesting in relation to the legends and timeline. Mary Bregovy is often believed to be the deceased woman behind the Resurrection Mary haunting, even though her physical appearance doesn't match the looks of the woman Jerry Palis danced with at the ballroom in 1939. The woman at the dance hall had shoulder-length blonde hair, but Bregovy's hair was short and dark. What's interesting, though, is that Mary Bregovy's home just happened to be on South Damon Avenue, the same street the woman at the dance hall told Jerry Palis she lived on. Bregovy also loved to dance, and her home on Damon Avenue was only 10 minutes away from the ballroom in Brighton Park. Mary Bregovy was said to be a beautiful woman, but sadly, she wouldn't make it past the age of 21. On the night of March 11, 1934, she was traveling in a car downtown with two men and another woman when a terrible accident unfolded. Tragically, only minutes before the accident, Mary moved to the front seat of the car at her friend's request and unknowingly sealed her own fate. While making a turn at the intersection of Lake Street and Wacker Drive, the male driver lost control of the vehicle and crashed head-on into an I-beam underneath the elevated railway. Mary was thrown through the passenger window during the crash and died on the way to the hospital after suffering major head injuries. Mary was buried in Resurrection Cemetery in an unmarked grave and would later be joined by her mother Joanna in 1945 and her father Stefan, who later hung himself in the family's garage in 1951. Mary's burial in Resurrection Cemetery, combined with her address and death only 5 years before the ballroom encounter, leads many people to believe she's the ghost. But others disagree for the fact that her physical appearance is different and Mary's death occurred nowhere near the cemetery. Another girl who many people believe is the true Resurrection Mary is Anna Norkus, who often went by her middle name Mary. Anna was only 12 years old, but she had blonde hair and lived less than 10 minutes away from Resurrection Cemetery. Anna also loved to dance, and she died only a few weeks before her birthday. On the night of her death, Anna begged her father to take her dancing at the O. Henry Ballroom on Archer Avenue. The father was reluctant to go to the ballroom, but agreed to take his daughter dancing along with an adult couple. After a long night of dancing, the group was driving home from the ballroom on July 20th, 1927 at 1:30 a.m. when the car plunged into a 25-foot train cut the city failed to fence off. Her father and the two adult passengers survived the crash, but Anna was crushed by the vehicle and died at the scene. Anna Norkus is often said to be Resurrection Mary due to her physical appearance and the fact that she died after a night of dancing. She was also dancing at the O. Henry Ballroom, where others saw the ghost of Mary in the years that followed. Others don't believe Anna Norkus is Resurrection Mary because the age of the woman doesn't line up with the Jerry Palis story from 1939. Anna Norkus was buried in St. Casimir Catholic Cemetery in Chicago, but some people believe she could have actually been buried in a temporary grave at Resurrection Cemetery due to gravedigger strikes at the time. In the 1920s, there were many gravedigger strikes in Chicago, and people would often be buried in temporary graves until the strikes were over. But due to poor burial conditions and other reasons, the temporary plots were often forgotten when the strikes ended, or the body and coffin were too decomposed to move to another cemetery. Burial records show Anna Norkus was buried in St. Casimir Cemetery, but if a gravedigger strike existed at that time, it is possible she was buried in Resurrection Cemetery and then never moved to her final burial site. Many people believe this scenario, combined with Anna's tragic death not far from the cemetery, could have led to the ghost of Resurrection Mary. What do you think about the paranormal stories of Resurrection Mary, and who do you think is behind the ghost? Do you think Jerry Palis really danced with Resurrection Mary, and have you ever witnessed the ghost yourself? Leave a comment below and let me know your thoughts. And if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe now if you haven't already. And before you go, be sure to check out more of my paranormal videos now by clicking on the playlist you see on the screen.